And then there were three. Fáilte Arasha Cordia, welcome to episode 3 of Undercover Irish. Today we're starting with a piece of cloth, a skort. Sometimes the past and the present can collide in unexpected ways, and this is one of those. The skort is at the centre of a very modern controversy raging at the moment in Camogie, one of our Gaelic games. For decades, women on the field have had to wear what they were told, and now they're saying enough is enough. It's about performance, it's about respect, and it's about choice. It's about who gets to decide what Irish sportswomen wear. But this is not the first time that a uniform, a kit, or a piece of clothing has sparked a row in Gaelic games, bringing the games from the back pages to the front pages. To look at this further, we start our story in Páirc Uí Chaoimh in Cork in 1976, a Reigling.
Today's final is John Maloney, Bencha Tipperary.
This is the dramatic scene in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, Cork's magnificent new stadium, which was only opened a month ago. Although Munster finals have been played here on this pitch when we knew it as the Athletic Grounds, this is the first provincial final in the stadium since it was transformed into Páirc Uí Chaoimh. That's the Kerry team, the Munster champions, defending the title today. And from the early hours, the fans have been pouring in, and the crowd's way over the 40,000. Already they're spilling over onto the sidelines in this packed capacity crowd. And here's the Cork team challenging Kerry today for the Munster title.
The voice of Mick Dunn there doing the commentary, and familiar sounds to anybody who's ever been to Páirc Uí Chaoimh down the years. This was a special day in Cork GAA history, and indeed wider than that, Munster GAA history, as the new old Páirc Uí Chaoimh, if you like, was getting its first real championship test. Now, the first championship game to take place there was actually between the Bars and Bishopstown, but this was the first time that the stadium would get its capacity crowd test in front of a championship game. The new covered stand, the new uncovered stand, and the Blackrock end terrace and the City end terrace were absolutely packed from very, very early on, and it was evident that this was going to create trouble down the line. Now, championship football can always bring out the physicality in people, and especially when Cork play Kerry, and particularly in this era. But the game was only about a minute or two old when an altercation between Kevin Kelly and Brendan Lynch, the kind of altercation that would probably see both of them sent to the line, or at least black-carded in the modern game, really tested the resolve and the patience of those patrons who had swept onto the field.
That's coming to Brendan Lynch, but he had his jersey pulled. The referee didn't see it, and obviously Brendan and Kevin Kelly a little bit angry with each other. The crowd here on the sideline, dangerously along the sideline now. Some of them want to get involved. The Gardaí already appearing. Unfortunately, because of the packed attendance here, the crowd spilled it over the wire off the terraces onto the sideline, and they're sitting all along the sidelines in front of the stand, and some of them wanted to get involved there in that difference of opinion between Brendan Lynch and Kevin Kelly. So it's a free for Kerry. Claude O'Shea, the right half back, to take it, and we hope there's not going to be trouble with that crowd down there, or more of them sitting on the sidelines dangerously close to the pitch. The free for Kerry.
Absolute scenes, and that pretty much set the tone for the game, particularly the first half. One newspaper column observed, maybe it was the close proximity of so many spectators that led to so much nervous tension among the players in the opening stages. Indeed, we had the brief threat of an early flare-up, and the entire first half was something of a war of attrition, an almost endless succession of niggling fouls. We had 36 frees in the opening 35 minutes, 20 to Kerry and 14 to Cork, most of them for jersey pulling, elbowing and obstruction. Perhaps given the circumstances, a draw was the fairest result, and the game did finish 10 points apiece, meaning that Munster final would be replayed to decide who went on to represent Munster in the All-Ireland that year. Now, obviously, this made front page news the next day. Just to take two headlines, for example, one had showpiece shambles and the other one poor organisation Mars final. But it's Tom O'Mahony's report that takes my eye. Tom O'Mahony in Cork states, chaotic crowd scenes marred yesterday's Munster senior final between Cork and Kerry at the new 1.3 million GAA stadium in Cork. Poor organisation and an almost total lack of stewarding very nearly ruined what was undoubtedly a glamour occasion for Cork GAA County Board. Thousands of disappointed followers had to be turned away, and thousands more had to endure a most uncomfortable time within the stadium itself, which has a capacity of 50,000. The teams will have to meet again in Cork on a date to be settled. In the meantime, however, the organisers will have to give very serious consideration to the problem of crowd control. During the minor match, which Cork won, gates at the Blackrock end of the new stadium were crashed by several hundred people. Later, teenagers poured through the windows of the toilets under the stand, having first smashed the glass. Even in the stand itself, where seats cost £2 each, the organisation was a shambles. At half-time, the match was held up for nearly 10 minutes, a situation that was not helped when the referee discovered that he had left his whistle in the dressing room. A replay date was set and Cork and Kerry met again in Páirc Uí Chaoimh to decide who would win the Munster final of 1976. And everybody involved must have been hoping and praying that there would be no controversy and no repeating of the scenes that were seen the first day in Páirc Uí Chaoimh. And while attention was on the crowd and crowd control, little did they know that another controversy would arise.
That's the scene today in Páirc Uí Chaoimh for the replay of the Munster football final, and the huge crowd here, there they are in most orderly fashion. They're in here today wiping out the memories of the disaster here 2 weeks ago when we had absence of crowd control and a lot of indiscipline. There were 40,500 2 weeks ago, and it looks to me as if there are a few thousand more here today.
Mick Dunn at pains to point out the orderly crowd. This was Páirc Uí Chaoimh now putting its best foot forward. This was Cork GAA putting its best foot forward. And as the teams paraded around and Mick started to name check the legends on display from both teams, special mention there for John Egan, even though I'm a Corkonian, little did Mick know that he was about to highlight the start of a new controversy.
12 was Pat Spillane, John Egan 13, 14 Mike Sheehy, the only forward in the same position he was the last day, and John Egan 15 behind Brendan Lynch's 30. Cork in an absolutely beautiful new red strip with the white stripes down their sleeves. Over on the right, the challengers, Kerry the defending champions, and of course the All-Ireland champions.
The strains of a nation once again rising up over the Blackrock end. You can't bait a pipe band on a day like that. Mick was after highlighting, however, the fact that Cork were wearing a new strip, a new jersey, and it was very much in contrast with what Cork had worn in the first game. Traditionally, the blood and bandage was red and white, and that was it. On this occasion, however, Cork were wearing a jersey that was probably more familiar or more suited to the Premier League or the English First Division, as it was at the time. A high white collar around the neck and 3 white stripes running down the side of the kit. You see, the Cork team on that day was wearing a set of jerseys that was made for them by Three Stripe International, a subsidiary of Adidas. And while the game finished with a Kerry victory, and Cork obviously lost and exited the championship, a controversy much bigger than the initial first day, which was marred by crowd control failures and all sorts of other scandals. A controversy around the strip was about to rage for months and indeed years ahead, because the GAA at the time had a rule which stated that all kit, all jerseys, all shorts had to be manufactured in Ireland. Three Stripe International, as a subsidiary of Adidas, was importing these jerseys from Germany. And this was out of bounds for many. And it wasn't long before Cork County Board had to make public statements on the matter. Donal O'Sullivan, He was then the chairman of the county board. He made a statement shortly afterwards saying that in future, Cork would only wear jerseys of Irish manufacture. In the papers it said Mr. O'Sullivan was referring to last Sunday's Munster football final between Cork and Kerry at Páirc Uí Chaoimh. Cork wore jerseys that had been manufactured outside of Ireland in that game. Mr. O'Sullivan said at Tuesday's meeting that it was intimated to the secretary the week before the game that jerseys were being presented to the team. He assumed it was from the usual source in Cork County. However, the jerseys were not given to the county secretary and were distributed to the players in the dressing room. That was wrong in itself, he added. It was when the players were togged out that it was seen that the jerseys carried the emblem with the name of a certain maker attached. I was consulted while in the main stand by the Rooney, and I said that the jerseys should not be worn as they were not the Cork registered colours as provided by the rule, he said. Mr. O'Sullivan added, to avoid an undesirable situation before an important contest, a compromise was arrived at, whereby the brand name was taped over. It was a situation that was to be deplored, as we have always prided ourselves in supporting Irish manufacturers, he said. And I wish to confirm that we will in future wear only the official Cork colours of Irish manufacture, and if possible, made in Cork. Also, donations from firms or individuals will only be accepted through the Secretary of the Board, and all selection committees are being informed of this. You know, it's comical now to imagine Rooney, the Secretary, running around the dressing room prior to the Munster final, applying black tape to cover up the Adidas logo, and the fact that they couldn't even mention the firm's name in their official communications. But Rule 3E of the association at the time stated, the association shall support Irish industry and its members shall do likewise as a duty of practical patriotism. So this was something that they took extremely seriously at the time. Now, every era has a social history where you can see tradition versus modern fashions, where you can see changing times happening right before your eyes. And imagery is very, very powerful. So the imagery of the Cork jersey, the modern Cork jersey, if you like, in 1976, with its Adidas stripes and its tighter fit, more athletic fit, shall we say, versus the older Kerry jersey, is one very striking image. And I'm also struck by, in the first game, the ball, of course, is thrown in by the Bishop of Cork, a tradition at the time, and he's flanked by a photographer who's wearing bell-bottoms or flares, which obviously are fashionable at the time. And these are social histories which we see unfolding before our very eyes, and it's the same in every era, and it's the same in every single generation. It's important to remember as well that this is the decade after Ireland has entered the EEC, so there's a fundamental change in terms of Ireland's economy. Out is the economic protectionism of the 30s, and the government in the south is trying to open up the economy to Europe and the rest of the world. And obviously this creates its own tensions in terms of indigenous industry and the fear of job losses. And there follows a kind of a scare around foreign jerseys. So, for example, a columnist in the Echo, after praising Cork GAA for remedying the catastrophe of the first day, mentions that he was a bit perturbed by the news that the Cork team had to go to Germany for their sports gear, while Kerry supported Cork industry. And he goes on to say, we hear an awful lot about our national heritage, but isn't it a bit of practical patriotism to buy Irish? Never mind the flag waving and nationalistic emotionalism. He then goes on to say, since I wrote, I heard that Wexford also went outside of the country for their gear in the Leinster senior hurling final. So this kind of Adidas three-stripe scare is spreading, and now Wexford are in the firing line. And this prompts a letter to respond to that from a D. Burke, managing director of Euro Sports Gear International Limited, Clondrahood, County Cork. And he writes to correct the contents of the Evening Echo's article. And he says, quote, Wexford have never worn the foreign-made jerseys referred to in the article, What they did wear was a 3-stripe jersey, which was made in Ireland by an all-Irish manufacturing company. I might add also that Dublin used a 3-stripe jersey, but they were also of Irish manufacture. Cork footballers have the honour or the shame of being the first inter-county team to have worn, quote, foreign-made, quote, 3-stripe jerseys. The above error regarding Wexford was due to Mr. D. Allen, that's Dinny Allen, speaking on a subject he or the Cork trainer should never have been involved in, as they were evidently ill-advised as well as being indifferent to the wishes of their county supporters who have so faithfully followed them in failure as well as success. I would be pleased if you would see your way to give the people of Cork the correct information as stated above. And behind all of this is the definite move of Adidas under the name 3-Stripe International, their move into the Irish economy or the Irish market. And they started off in 1971 by setting up 3-Stripe International as a distribution company, and they were based out of the South Cork Industrial Estate, which is in Toker. It would be familiar to many, many people in Cork. And they were importing about £750,000 worth of sportswear in their by 1977, compared to 80,000 in their first year. But this was an importation company as opposed to a manufacturing company, and this is something that they sought to rectify in later years. Because if the problem was that the kits were not of Irish manufacture, Adidas was determined to try to remedy that. So in 1977, Adidas sets up a manufacturing company in Buncrana in Donegal, and it was aimed to give employment to up to 50 people, and they were aiming for the Irish market, concentrating on GAA sportswear. And at the unveiling or the opening of the factory, Miss Cathy Dassler, wife of the company's founder and chief executive, Adolf Dassler, officially opened the firm's new distribution outlet, 3-Stripe International. Officially, this was an Irish-owned company based out of Cork. The Buncrana plant was formed in association with a local manufacturer, and it was aiming to produce and export, aiming for 2 million in its first year, twice the value of its annual imports of Adidas goods to Ireland. Back to matters on the field, in 1977, Cork took the field in Fitzgerald Stadium, Killarney, to take on Kerry again in the Munster final. All eyes were on Cork, or more specifically, all eyes were on Cork jerseys. However, the Cork jerseys were not controversial. There was nothing unusual about them. And Kerry piled on the agony on Cork, winning 3-15 to 9 points. Controversy averted, or so we thought. By Wednesday, a new controversy had flared up. And in thinking back to the start of this podcast, it was over the shorts the Cork players were wearing. The front page of the Echo the following Wednesday, July 27th, is something to look at. You know, the headline is Board Sees Red Over Stripes. Cork team suspended. And given how obvious the previous year the jerseys were, it's slightly farcical that the offending material this time is shorts, which have to be highlighted in the photograph on the front page. And Michael Ellard writes, in a sensational and unprecedented move, the entire playing personnel of the Cork senior football team, which lost last Sunday's Munster Senior Football Championship final to Kerry, have been suspended from intercounty football for 6 months. The suspension has been imposed by the Cork County Board because the players wore, quote, nicks carrying a distinctive company emblem in last Sunday's game, contrary to an official directive issued by the board last week. Now, 3-Stripe International, aka Adidas, they firmly have their sights set on the Irish market, and they're not going to take this line down. And the response comes quickly from Mr. Michael O'Connell, who is the chief executive of 3-Stripes International, and he states, the announcement by Cork County Board is incredible. We are totally astounded that Cork footballers should be so harshly treated. We cannot understand why the Cork County Board has singled out its senior football team when its hurling team had won the Munster final wearing Adidas goods. He goes on to say, if it is a matter of country of origin, let us put on record that Adidas is a major exporter of Irish-made goods, with a 4-to-1 surplus of exports over imports. He also went on to claim that since the abolition of restrictive trade practices in 1970, the majority of intercounty teams had worn Adidas products. And so, Corja, we end part 1 of this story. We end with the Cork footballer suspended for a period of 6 months for wearing Adidas or three-stripe international shorts. And we'll return to discuss where this battle went afterwards, including the battle between O'Neill's and Adidas over those distinctive three stripes, which takes place in the newspapers, on the streets, in terms of fashion, of course, and indeed ends up in the court. And of course, we also discuss and we look at the current Skorts controversy, which is bubbling over in Camogie, and look at some of the social history that exists around that particular controversy. Gurmila Mahagut Asokt Felling, thank you so much for being with me on today's episode. Second one will drop ASAP as soon as possible. Kharja. I'm really looking forward to being with you again. Agus Ganairi live Eraigling.